So, let's talk about doubt. It's a big one, right? Especially today, in a world that's all about science, reason, and, well, let's be honest, a world with a lot of suffering. It's a question that hits home for a lot of us. Today, we're going to look at faith and doubt from a totally different angle. And look, it's a totally fair question to ask. I mean, if God's supposed to be good, then what's with all the pain in the world? And it feels like with every big scientific breakthrough, faith gets kind of pushed a little more into a corner, doesn't it? These aren't just hypotheticals we debate over coffee. For so many people, this is a real personal struggle. But what if we've got it backward? What if asking these huge questions isn't a sign that your faith is falling apart, but actually the very thing that could lead you to something much, much deeper? Right, so what if we've been looking at this whole thing completely upside down? The big idea we're digging into is this. We need to reframe doubt. We're so used to thinking of it as, a betrayal, the enemy. But what if it's the opposite? What if doubt is actually a sign of honesty? What if it's not a villain trying to destroy your faith, but more like a personal tutor there to make it stronger, to make it real? And believe it or not, this isn't some new radical idea. We're talking centuries ago. A guy named St. Augustine said it pretty bluntly: faith that doesn't think is dead. His point was that a faith that's scared of tough questions, well, it's not really a living thing, is it? So a questioning faith isn't a weak faith. It's an alive faith, a thinking faith. And that really gets to the core of it, doesn't it? We tend to think of doubt as this graveyard where faith just goes to die. But what if it's actually fertile soil? Like the exact kind of soil you need for a tougher, deeper faith to actually take root and grow. It's that struggle, that pressure, that turns a faith you just kind of grew up with into something you truly, deeply own for yourself. Okay, so this whole tension between believing and doubting, it's not some modern thing we just came up with. Not at all. In fact, if you go back and look at the most foundational stories of the faith, you'll see that this kind of honest questioning is baked right into the DNA of the whole story. And we're not talking about some obscure, minor characters here. We are talking about the heavy hitters. Abraham, the father of a nation, he straight up questioned God's plan. Moses, the guy who parted the Red Sea, he argued with God. King David, the man after God's own heart, he literally screamed into the void, asking where God was. And get this, even John the Baptist, the guy whose whole job was to announce Jesus, sent a message from his prison cell asking, "Hey, are you actually the guy, or should we be waiting for someone else?" Their stories are shouting at us that doubt is totally normal, it's part of the path. And then, of course, you've got the poster child for doubt, good old Doubting Thomas. This guy, he wasn't having any of it. He wasn't just going to take his friend's word for it. I mean, think about what he'd just been through. The betrayal, the brutal execution. He needed proof. Cold, hard, empirical evidence. He said, unless I can see it and touch it for myself, I'm not buying it. And this is where the story turns. This is the absolute key. How does Jesus react to this demand? This prove it to me attitude? Does he get angry? Does he rebuke him? Nope, not at all. He responds with an invitation. He just says, okay, put your hand here. He offers his own scars as the evidence. He meets raw doubt not with a lecture, but with a revelation. That one moment tells you so much. It reveals this incredible tenderness at the very center of this faith. It's not demanding you shut your brain off and just obey blindly. It's an open invitation. It's saying, bring it all. Bring your brain, bring your heart, bring your baggage, and put me to the test. It's a faith that looks you in the eye and says your questions are welcome here. All right, so that naturally leads us to the big one, right? The supposed knockdown, drag-out fight between science and faith. The story we always hear is that science is winning and faith is in full retreat. But is that actually what happened? Is that the whole story? Well, check this out. This timeline kind of flips that whole narrative on its head. So many of the absolute pioneers of modern science were deeply religious people. Copernicus, he was searching for the simplicity of God's creation. Isaac Newton, the guy who gave us gravity, he literally wrote that he was trying to demonstrate God's power. And Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics, he was a priest. He saw the hand of God in his garden. For these guys, science wasn't the enemy of faith, it was a way of exploring it. So here's the deal. Maybe science and faith aren't at war because they're not even in the same weight class. They're asking totally different kinds of questions. Science is incredible at answering the how questions. How does this work? What are the mechanics? Faith, on the other hand, tackles the why questions. Why are we here? What's the point of all this? They're like two different toolkits for exploring the very same universe. C.S. Lewis, who was a huge skeptic before he became a believer, put it in a way I just love. He said he believes in Christianity like he believes in the sun. Not just because he can see the sun, but because by the sun he can see everything else. For him, faith didn't cancel out his reason. It was the light that made everything else make sense. It was the framework that held the whole picture together.
Okay, but this brings us to the hardest part. Let's be real. This is where the intellectual questions stop being academic and they get personal. We're talking about the problem of pain, the question that keeps so many people up at night. If God is good and powerful, why is there so much suffering?
And that leads to a pretty shocking question when you think about it. If Christianity was just invented to be a psychological crutch, to make us feel all warm and fuzzy, it does a terrible job. Because what's its central symbol? It's not a fluffy cloud or a golden throne. It's a cross, an ancient Roman instrument of torture.
And that takes us right to the absolute core paradox of the whole thing. The claim is that God's ultimate power, his ultimate strength, isn't revealed by snapping his fingers and making all the bad stuff disappear. No, it's revealed by him entering into the suffering, right into the heart of it. The answer to pain isn't a demonstration of power, it's an act of solidarity.
So when we're screaming why into the darkness, the answer that comes back isn't a neat little formula. It's not a textbook chapter. The answer is a person. It's a God who doesn't watch our pain from a safe distance, but one who gets down in the mud with us, who carries it himself. A God who wins not by overpowering everything, but through this radical, self-sacrificing love. And if you need proof, just listen to these words from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? That is the sound of absolute abandonment. The claim here is that God, in that moment, felt the deepest, darkest pit of human doubt and despair. He doesn't just have sympathy for our pain, he has empathy. He's been there. So when you step back and look at the whole thing, you can see this clear path emerge, right? A lot of us start out with a faith we just kind of inherit as a kid, but then life happens. The hard questions come, the fire of doubt shows up. And the point is, that's not the end. That's the bridge. That's the necessary step to get from a borrowed belief to a living conviction, a trust that's been through the fire and come out real. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important takeaway. After all this wrestling with doubts and reason and pain, what even is faith? Well, here's what it's not. It's not having 100% certainty. It's not getting to a place where you have zero questions and zero doubts. No, it's something else. It's the courage to keep trusting even with the uncertainty. It's choosing to be faithful when you don't have all the answers neatly lined up. It's deciding to trust that God is good, even when the picture is messy and incomplete. It's more like a relationship than an equation. And maybe we can end with this thought from Augustine again, because it just reframes everything. What if all this doubt, this endless questioning we feel, what if it's not a flaw? What if it's not a problem we have to fix? What if it's just a sign that we're restless? Because we were made for something more. A sign that our hearts are searching for their way home.